Hello again and welcome back to another time for a reflection at the spiritual roundup at the Winchester Cathedral. You know, it's funny how things occur in our lives that alter the directions that we go in. And I'm reminded of that by a true story that I picked up the other day off the internet, written by Kent Nerber. And it's called The Last Cab Ride. And this really touched me in a way that I'll share with you in a moment. 20 years ago, I drove a cab for a living. One time, I arrived in the middle of the night to pick up at a building that was very dark, except for a single light in a ground floor window. Under these circumstances, many cab drivers would just honk once or twice, wait a minute, and then drive away. But I had seen too many impoverished people who depended on taxis as their only means of transportation. Unless the situation smelled of danger, I always went to the door. This passenger might be someone who needs assistance, I reasoned to myself. So I walked to the door and I knocked. "Just a minute," answered a frail, elderly voice. I could hear something being dragged across the floor. After a long pause, the door opened. A small woman in her 80s stood there before me. She wore a print dress and a pillbox hat with a veil pinned on it like somebody out of a 1940s movie. By her side was a small nylon suitcase. The apartment looked as if no one had lived in it for years. All the furniture was covered with sheets. There were no clocks on the walls, no knickknacks, no utensils on the counters. In the corner was a cardboard box filled with photos and glassware. "Would you carry my bag out to the car for me?" she said. I took the suitcase to the curb, then returned to assist the woman. She took my arm and we walked slowly to the curb. She kept thanking me for my kindness. "It's nothing," I told her. "I treat my passengers the way I would want my mother to be treated." "Oh, you're such a good boy," she said. When we got to the cab, she gave me an address and then asked, "Could you drive through downtown?" "It's not the shortest way, ma'am," I answered quickly. "Oh, I don't mind," she said. "I'm in no hurry. I'm on my way to hospice." I looked in the rearview mirror and her eyes were glistening. "I don't have any family left," she continued. "The doctor says I don't have very long." I quietly reached over and I shut off the meter. "Which route would you like me to take?" I asked. For the next 2 hours, we drove through the city. She showed me the building where she had once worked as an elevator operator. We drove through the neighborhood where she and her husband had lived when they were just newlyweds. She had me pull up in front of a furniture warehouse that had once been a ballroom where she had gone dancing as a young girl. Sometimes she'd ask me to slow in front of a particular building or corner, and I would sit staring into the darkness, saying nothing. As the first hint of the sun was creasing on the horizon, she suddenly said, "I'm tired. Let's go now." We drove in silence to the address she had given me. It was a low building, like a small convalescent home, with a driveway that passed under a portico. 2 orderlies came out to the cab as soon as we pulled up. They were very solicitous and intent, watching her every move. They must have been expecting her. I opened the trunk and took a small suitcase to the door. The woman was already seated in a wheelchair. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, reaching into her purse. "Nothing," I said. "You have to make a living," she answered. "There are other passengers." Almost without thinking, I bent and gave her a hug. She held on to me tightly. "You gave a little moment of joy," she said. "Thank you." I squeezed her hand, then walked into the dim morning light. Behind me, a door shut. It was the sound of a life closing. Well, I didn't pick up any more passengers that shift. I drove aimlessly, lost in thought. For the rest of the day, I could hardly talk. What if that woman had gotten an angry driver or one who was impatient to end his shift? What if I had refused to take the lunch or had honked only once and then driven away quickly? On reviewing, I don't think I had done anything more important in my life. We're conditioned to think about our lives and they revolve around great moments, but great moments often catch us unaware, beautifully wrapped in what others consider a small. Wow. When I read that, it really took me back. And it made me think about the direction my life has taken. Many years ago, I became involved and became a member in a church that largely had a senior congregation in Sun City. I grew to fall in love with the congregants, members of America's greatest generation. I was in awe of men and women who had fought in the great wars and been married for over 50 years. And over the years, I watched that congregation atrophy as they all began one by one taking their transition. And that gave way to my further spiritual studies. Later I became involved with a hospital chaplaincy program with one of the hospital chains in the Valley, and currently doing hospice volunteer work. And I found this to be extremely rewarding, which led me to another story I had heard about two men who shared a hospital room. One of the men was placed by the only window in the room and was able to sit up because of his health challenge to clear some of his breathing. And the other gentleman was behind a curtain partition and was forced to lay down because of his health challenge. And every day they would sit the man up near the window who would report to the man who was laying down what was going on outside. And this was his only link to the outside world. And every day at the appointed time, the man closest to the window would sit up and he would talk about the beautiful colors of the day outside. And even though the man that was lying down could not hear, he would describe the chirping of the birds and the wafting of the trees outside. Occasionally he would speak about young lovers walking by hand in hand as they walked by a park-like area that was visible to them outside. This led to discussions about their lives and their families and what had happened over the years. And even one day a parade went by and the man who could see out the window relayed that to his roommate. Well, the day came when the nurses came in to check on the patients that morning, and they found the lifeless body of the man next to the window. As they moved him out, the gentleman who was lying next to him on the other side of the partition asked if he could take the space next to the window, and they agreed. And they moved the gentleman over and they sat him up in the bed. And he looked out the window and was amazed to see only a brick wall outside. He was confused and he asked the nurse how the man who had previously occupied that window bedside seat, had relayed all those wonderful things, those passings outside the window. And she said, well, I don't know, because he was blind and he couldn't see. He says, maybe he was just trying to cheer you up. Well, just like those events had very great meaning to the people who were there, it makes us think about our service to others and how just little things can be so meaningful in their lives. So let's give thanks for the faculties we do have, for the lifespan that we have left remaining in front of us, and see if we can find a way every day to be of service to others and help them in those small ways that to us are very small, but could be life-changing and very meaningful to those who are on the receiving end. Well, thanks for joining us again, and God bless you all.